Hello everyone, and welcome to lesson 8.8, which is on the quadratic formula. This is the final lesson of the entire class and the final lesson of chapter 8 before our final exam. The quadratic formula is a formula that we use to solve quadratic equations. Now, the quadratic formula can be used on every single quadratic equation. Every single one. So if you have had problems in 8.7, in 8.6, in 8.5, in 8.4 with factoring and breaking down problems and solving for x, this method will get you through every problem whether they can factor or not. Now, the quadratic formula is long. There are lots of steps to it, especially when we take time to write every step out. That also means that there's lots of places to make simple math errors, but if we're careful, we can get through this equation just fine. Now, the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and all of that is over 2a. Now, these a, b's, and c's that are in the quadratic formula are the same a, b's, and c's that are in our general form of a quadratic equation. So the reason that we use a, b's, and c's to solve a quadratic equation in the quadratic formula is because the general form is set up with a's, b's, and c's. The variables exactly match. So let's take a look at 3 examples of things that we will see here, and we will start by solving the equations. So our first example is x squared minus 15 plus 49. The first place that we have to start when solving our quadratic equation is to write out what a, b, and c are. That helps. So for us, a is going to be equal to 1 because that's the number in front of x squared. Even though it's not written, it's always there. B is negative 15, right? And we have to make sure to pay attention to the negative that's in front of the sign. If we don't pay attention to that, we are going to be in big trouble. All right, and C is going to be positive 49. Now, once we've done this, we can start by setting up our quadratic formula. Our quadratic formula, again, is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So our next step, once we know the quadratic formula, we have it written down, we know a, b, and c, is to just plug in numbers. So I'm going to write everything out in black, but when I plug in numbers, I'm going to plug them in red. So x is going to be equal to negative b, which is 1. And then we got plus or minus the square root of, and all this is under square roots, b, and b in this case is negative 15, squared, minus 4, a again is 1, c is 49, and all of that is over 2 times a. All right, so now that we have that, all we have to do is start simplifying. So as I simplify things, x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 15 squared is negative 15 times negative 15, which ends up being 225, minus 4 times 1 times 49, which ends up being 196, and all of that is going to be over 2. All right, keeping on going here, we say x is equal to negative 1, write that a little higher, negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 225 minus 196, which is 29. All of that is going to be over 2. All right. If we could take the square root of 29, we would, but since we cannot, our problem is finished. Now, technically, that gives us 2 answers. Now, we don't see why there's 2 answers, but if we look close, we got that whole plus or minus thing. So normally when we factor things out, we always got 2 parentheses and had 2 answers. In this case, it's no different. Our first answer is technically x being equal to -1 plus the square root of 29, everything over 2. And then x is also equal to -1 minus the square root of 29, everything over 2. Right? Those 2 things are the same. But that's how we solve these problems. So the quadratic formula has lots of steps. We just got to take our time and write it all out. Now, we have our second problem. I'm going to move it over a little bit just so we have more room to operate. But our second problem is square root of x is equal to 12 minus x. Now, we haven't seen anything like this. This isn't a quadratic. It's got a weird square root in it. We can't really solve anything. So, what do we do? Well, obviously, our first step is we got to get rid of a square root. And we know that the opposite of square rooting things is to square them. So, we're going to square both sides. Now, what that means is we know on the left-hand side, the square root and the squared cancel. That leaves me with x. That's good news. On the right-hand side, though, 12 minus x squared is really 12 minus x times 12 minus x, if I could write the right way. 12 minus x. So to simplify the right-hand side, we have to use our FOIL method or double distributive property. We multiply 12 times both numbers. That's going to be equal to 12 times 12, so 144. 12 times negative x is negative 12x. On the inside, right, next kind of term around, we take negative x times 12 and negative x times negative x. That's going to end up giving me negative 12x and positive x squared. And all of that is going to be equal to x. So we can keep simplifying and rewriting things in the correct order. When we do that, we know we can combine these terms in the middle. And writing things in the correct order, we start with x squared, negative 12x, minus 12x is negative 24x. Those are done. And then that leaves us with positive 144. All of that is still equal to x. Now, to finish off this problem, what we're going to do is we're going to subtract an x from both sides, making sure to line up those terms. And 0 is equal to x squared minus 25x plus 144. So, if we ever see anything like this, we have to make sure to square both sides. We have to understand what squaring both sides means. We also have to understand what that kind of factoring or that kind of squaring looks like and distributing. Once we get that, we get all the terms on one side, have it all set equal to 0, and now we're in a good shape to do what we did in problem 1. Problem 1, we went back, we had to figure out what A, B, and C are, right? A, B, and C. Well, A is equal to 1, B is equal to negative 25, and C is equal to 144. Now we have that because we lined up these terms in order, starting with x squared, then our x, then our number. So just got to be really careful about that. If they're not in order, we're going to have some problems. Then we go to our quadratic formula. We get x equals negative b, so that's negative 25, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's negative 25 squared, minus 4 times 1 times 144. And all of that is over 2 times 1. All right, now I'm going to zoom in because we have a lot of stuff here. So that's how we set up that problem, with A being 1, B being negative 25, and C being 144. Then our next step is just to keep simplifying. So x is equal to negative 25. Two negatives make a positive. Plus or minus the square root of negative 25 squared is negative 25 times negative 25. That's positive 625. Then we are going to subtract 4 times 1 times 144. We're going to subtract off 576. And we're going to put all that over 2. That's going to be equal to 25 plus or minus the square root of 625 minus 576, which ends up being 49, all being over 2. Now, in this problem, which is a little bit different, we can actually take the square root of 49. We know that the square root of 49 is 7. So we can now say that this is 25 plus or minus 7 over 2. And as we talked about in the last problem here, anytime we have our plus or minus, that is really saying that we have two separate answers, right? We have 25 plus 7 divided by 2, and we also have 25 minus 7 divided by 2. Well, 25 plus 7 divided by 2 ends up being 32 divided by 2, which is 16. And 25 minus 7 is 18 over 2, which ends up being 9. So by solving our quadratic equation, we are able to get two full solutions here. And those two solutions are 16 and 9. And that's just by taking our time and simplifying everything out. Even though where we started was way back up here, having to simplify the problem and solve the problem. Okay, we have one more example to look at here when we switch pages. Okay, so our last example for section 8.8 is kind of a word problem that uses a complex quadratic function and equation. All we have to do, even though you see these, the answer is quadratic formula, and we're going to show you how to solve this and explain like why the answer is what it is. Okay, so our problem that we have is that John shot a 3-point shot. The flight of the ball is modeled by the equation negative 16t squared plus 16t plus 480. T is measuring the time in seconds, and h is measuring the height in feet. How much time did it take for the ball to hit the ground? So, what we're going to do here is we are going to do the quadratic formula. So, we got to find our A, our B, and our C. So, A, B, and C. A is negative 16, B is positive 16, and C is 480. Now, I know that those are some bigger numbers than we're used to, and yes, that means we're going to get bigger numbers in our quadratic formula, but it's all going to work out for us. So, whenever we solve this equation, we're going to just start out with the old quadratic formula. So, x is equal to negative b, which is positive 16, plus or minus the square root of 16 squared minus 4 times A, which is negative 16, times C, which is 480. That's the scary piece. And that is all over 2 times A, and we know that A is negative 16. So now we simplify. We end up getting negative 16 plus or minus the square root of 16 squared is 256. And we're going to subtract 4 times negative 16 times 480. So 4 times negative 16 times 480 is negative 30720. All of that is over 2 times negative 16, which is negative 32. Now, one thing that we do have to take a look at is something that's happened from time to time. We have negative, negative. Remember that negative times a negative just makes a positive. So we are adding. When we simplify, that's going to give us negative 16 plus or minus the square root of 256 plus 30720, which ends up being 30976. Wow, that is a big number inside the radical. But have no fear, it's all going to work out. And that's still over negative 32. Okay, so now all we have to do is rewrite everything, and we're going to try to simplify this radical. What is the square root of 30976? It's okay to use a calculator, obviously. I don't know this just from my head, but the square root of 30976 is 176. That's a pretty manageable number, and we're going to divide by negative 32. Now, as we've talked about in these problems, when we get down to this step, we know we have two separate answers. We have one answer that is negative 16 plus 176 over negative 32, and we have another answer that's negative 16 minus 176 over negative 32. All right, so simplifying the first side, the first problem on the left there, negative 16 plus 176 is equal to 160. We're going to take 160 and divide that by negative 32, and we are going to get negative 5 as an answer. Our second problem, we have negative 16 minus 176. That's going to give us negative 192. When we divide that by negative 32, we end up getting positive 6. So look at that. After all those long numbers, we get two answers. Now, it asked us back in the original problem, it says, how much time did it take for the ball to hit the ground? Well, you got to think. Let's just be logical here. If I'm shooting a basketball, there is no way to go back in time, right? We're not Marty McFly. We don't have a DeLorean. We can't go back in time at all. So negative time is not a thing, right? Just like negative distance is not a thing. So out of our two possible answers, which we have right here at negative 5 and positive 6, negative 5 isn't going to work because negative time isn't possible. That means that our final answer is 6. How many seconds does it take for the ball to hit the ground? 6 seconds. Now, another way to understand this negative time scenario is if I was to graph the equation, right? Let's imagine you got a guy that's over here shooting a basketball, right? The flight of the ball is going to look something like this. Well, if this is time and this is height, we start at 0 and we go forward through time. Well, right here, that's 6 seconds. And that's what we're looking for, right? We can't shoot the ball in negative time. We just don't have that ability. So hopefully that's helped with solving equations using the quadratic formula. Yes, I know it's longer. Yes, I know there's a lot of steps to it. Yes, some numbers can get big, but you are allowed to use your calculator like you have been on every section in this entire class. But hopefully this has helped you. Hopefully these lessons have been beneficial to you to get answers and to solve things. And as you prepare for the final, please reach out to me for any help that you might have or that you might need. I'm here to help. I'm glad to help. Please just reach out to me and let me know.